My ex-husband's girlfriend banned my 9-year-old son from his own birthday party. She looked him in the eye, this little boy whose birthday cake I had spent 2 hours making the night before, and told him he was not part of the family anymore. She said it in front of 12 relatives. She said it like it was simply true, like a fact about the weather. I did not cry. I stood up from that folding chair, smoothed the front of my dress, and smiled. Then I handed her an envelope. Inside was documentation showing that she had transferred $4,200 from the joint account she shared with my ex-husband into a separate account she controlled alone. I looked at the room full of people who had just watched her say those words to my child, and I said, "Tell them whose name is on the original deed to this house. Because it is not his, and it is not yours." That is when the police arrived. But to understand why I was calm enough to smile in that moment, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to when I was still a woman people felt comfortable underestimating. My name is Nora Scott. My ex-husband is a man named Derek Salinas, and we were married for 6 years before the divorce was finalized on March 3, 2021. Our son, Caleb, was born during that marriage. He is my biological child and Derek's biological child. Derek's girlfriend, the woman who told my son he was not family, is named Renata Voss. She has been with Derek since approximately 4 months after our divorce, which tells you everything you need to know about the timeline and nothing you probably didn't already suspect. Derek's mother is Glenda Salinas. She is 71 years old, has lived in the same house in Riverside for 38 years, and has spent the better part of a decade looking at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you inherited and never liked, but felt too guilty to get rid of. Glenda was present the day my son was banned from his own birthday party. She did not intervene. I will come back to that. Let me tell you how it started, how the pattern I had spent years quietly documenting finally reached its breaking point in front of 12 people who had watched it build and chose silence every single time. Derek and I met when I was 26 and working as a property analyst for a mid-sized real estate investment firm in Riverside. The job was unremarkable on its surface. I reviewed properties, ran numbers, and wrote reports that went to people with better titles who made the actual decisions. I was good at it. I was better than good. But in the Salinas family, my job was always described the same way. She does something with real estate. Not a real career, just something. Like I was filling time between more serious endeavors. Glenda set that tone early. The first Christmas I spent with Derek's family, she sat across from me at the dinner table and told me, with genuine warmth and no apparent self-awareness, that it was smart of me to work while Derek finished building his contracting business, because women in service jobs always had something to fall back on. Service jobs. I had just closed a review on a commercial property valued at $2.4 million. I did not correct her. I passed the rolls and noted it quietly, the way you note a crack in a foundation that will matter later. 3 years into our marriage, Derek's sister, a woman named Yolanda Salinas-Chun, came to visit for a long weekend and spent 48 hours offering me unsolicited advice about my career trajectory. She told me I should look into office management because property analysis was too unstable for someone thinking about starting a family. Yolanda worked in pharmaceutical sales and drove a Lexus she talked about constantly, and she delivered that advice with the absolute confidence of someone who has never questioned whether their opinions are wanted. I smiled and refilled her coffee. That same afternoon, I took a call from my financial advisor, a man named Raymond Ackafer, who had been managing a real estate investment portfolio I had quietly been building for 2 years. Raymond told me the total value had just crossed $800,000. I said, "Thank you, Raymond," and went back inside to hear more about the virtues of office management. That portfolio was not a secret I kept to protect some dramatic reveal. I kept it private because in the Salinas family, money I had was money Derek was expected to have equal access to, equal say over, and equal credit for. Any success I achieved alone became, in their framing, a shared family asset that Glenda and Yolanda and eventually Renata felt entitled to weigh in on. The one time I mentioned to Derek that Raymond had helped me expand into a second investment property, Glenda overheard and spent 3 weeks suggesting I put everything into a joint account so the family finances would be simpler. I had seen what happened to Simple. I was not interested in Simple. By the time Caleb was born, the portfolio had 2 properties. At the time, Derek told me he thought we had grown apart, which is what he said. I've always found that phrase remarkable for how it makes distance sound like something that just happens, like erosion, rather than something one person actively chooses. The portfolio had 4 properties and a total assessed value that I will not specify, except to say it was enough that Raymond recommended incorporating, which I did, 12 days after Derek moved out. The company is called NSR Properties LLC. It exists quietly, generates income consistently, and has never once come up at a Salinas family dinner. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that silence feels like. It is not weakness. It is inventory. You are noting everything. You are filing it. The divorce itself was civil in the way that things can be civil when one party is too distracted by a new relationship to pay close attention to the paperwork. Derek had a contracting business and a truck and a bank account. He had his name on our shared home in Riverside, which we agreed to sell and split. What he did not have, what he had never asked about directly and therefore had never been told about, was any stake in NSR Properties. My attorney at the time, a family law specialist named Diana Ferreira at a firm in downtown Riverside, reviewed everything carefully. The portfolio had been established before the marriage in its original form, though expanded during it. The question of marital commingling was something Diana and I had documented meticulously over 2 consultations in January of 2020, more than a year before Derek filed. Diana had been thorough. I had been thorough. The final settlement reflected that thoroughness in a way that Derek, who reviewed the documents with a general practice attorney who also handled DUIs, did not fully appreciate until much later. The custody arrangement gave me primary physical custody of Caleb, with Derek having parenting time every other weekend and on alternating holidays, which included birthdays. Specifically, Caleb's birthdays were to be spent with whichever parent had physical custody that year on the actual date, with the other parent's celebration happening within a window of 2 weeks on either side. I had Caleb for his 9th birthday. I had planned a party. And then, 3 days before, Derek called to tell me that Renata was organizing a birthday gathering at Glenda's house for the same weekend, and that it would mean a lot to him if Caleb could be there. I want to be clear about something. I did not object to Caleb having 2 birthday celebrations. I objected to nothing, initially. Children deserve to be loved from multiple directions. I said that was fine, and I confirmed the time, and I baked the cake the night before because Caleb had specifically asked for chocolate with the green frosting, and I was not going to let a woman who had never once asked my son what his favorite color was be the one to hand him a grocery store sheet cake decorated with someone else's idea of what a 9-year-old wants. The party at Glenda's was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on Saturday. I drove Caleb there myself. I brought the cake in a carrier and a bag with 2 changes of clothes and the small book he had been reading because he liked having it even when he was not reading it, just to know it was there. We pulled into Glenda's driveway and I could see through the front window that the house was already full. 12 people, minimum. Extended family I recognized and a few I did not. Renata met us at the door. She looked at Caleb first, then at me, and her expression did something complicated, a kind of flattening, like a door closing slowly and deliberately. Then she looked at Caleb again and said, "This party is for family. You are not part of this family anymore." She said it to my 9-year-old son. He looked up at me. He did not cry immediately. Children that age have a half-second delay between hearing something that hurts and registering that it is allowed to hurt, and in that half-second I watched his face do the calculation. Then his chin went. I knew that chin. I had seen that chin since he was 11 days old. I am going to be honest about what I felt in that moment because I think honesty is the only thing that makes a story worth telling. What I felt was not surprise. Renata had been escalating for months, small moments, dismissive language, the particular way she referred to Caleb as Derek's son rather than by name. None of it had ever been addressed directly because Derek had a habit, which I had documented in a separate folder I kept on my laptop, of minimizing each incident individually while the pattern grew. What I felt was not even anger, not at first. What I felt was a very cold and very specific clarity. The kind that comes when something you have been preparing for finally announces itself. I put my hand on Caleb's shoulder. I felt him lean back into it slightly, the way he does when he is uncertain whether something is going to be okay. I looked at Renata for a moment without speaking. Inside the house, I could see Glenda near the kitchen doorway. She had her hand on her necklace, a gold chain she wore every single day, the one her late husband had given her, and she was not moving toward us. She was watching. Derek was visible at the edge of the living room, and he was looking at his phone. I reached into the bag I was carrying and took out the envelope. The envelope had been prepared 4 days earlier, not because I had anticipated this exact moment in this exact form, but because I had anticipated something. I had met with Diana Ferreira in her downtown office on the previous Tuesday. We had discussed several things. One of them was a financial disclosure she had formally requested from Derek's side back in October in connection with a custody modification review. Derek had provided his business records. He had not apparently told Renata about the disclosure request, and Renata had not told Derek that she had, in the previous 2 months, made 3 transfers from their joint account, totaling $4,200, to a separate account, an account that was not referenced in his disclosure. Diana had flagged it. I had printed the documentation. I handed Renata the envelope. The 12 people in that room had gone quiet by then. Glenda's hand tightened on her necklace. Derek had put his phone in his pocket. I said, "Tell them whose name is on the original deed to this house. Because before Derek's name was on this property, before your name was ever considered, this address belonged to a trust that has been in this family for 22 years. And the documentation on the trustee is inside that envelope along with the transfer records from your joint account. So I want you to tell all 12 of these people, whose name is actually on what." That is when the police arrived. Not because I called them. I did not call them. Renata had called them about 40 minutes earlier. Apparently, before we even arrived, she had called Derek's cousin, who was a Riverside County Sheriff's deputy, and told him there might be a custody issue at the address. She had planned to use it as leverage if I showed up and made trouble. The deputy, whose name I will not use because he was genuinely mortified by what he walked into, arrived to find his Aunt Glenda holding her necklace like a prayer bead, his cousin Derek standing very still near the living room wall, and a woman named Renata Voss holding an envelope with documentation of $4,200 in transfers that had not been disclosed to a family court. He looked at the envelope. He looked at Renata. He looked at Derek. He pulled out a notepad. That is the moment I want to tell you about in detail. But first, let me take you back to the 4 months before that Saturday, because the reason I had that envelope, the reason I was calm enough to stand in Glenda Salinas's doorway and say what I said without my voice doing a single thing I didn't want it to do, starts with a phone call I made on a Tuesday morning in late November. Raymond Ackafer had been managing my portfolio since I was 28 years old. He is the kind of financial advisor who asks about your child by name and remembers the answer the next time. When I called him that Tuesday, Caleb was at school, and I was sitting at the kitchen table of the house I owned in a neighborhood the Salinas family had never visited, drinking coffee that had gone cold, because I had been thinking instead of drinking it. I told Raymond what had been happening. Not the emotional version. I had processed that with my sister over 2 separate evenings. I told Raymond the financial and logistical version. The custody modification filing Derek had initiated in September, claiming he needed more time with Caleb for reasons that had more to do with Renata's preferences than Caleb's welfare. The transferred funds I had noticed in the disclosure documents Diana had reviewed, and a specific conversation I had overheard at Glenda's house 3 months prior, during what had been billed as a family dinner, but was actually, I later understood, a kind of informal counsel about how to reclassify the custody arrangement. I had overheard Renata tell Derek's sister Yolanda that the key was getting Caleb's primary residence changed, because then Nora's child support calculation flips and she actually has to pay Derek, and a woman like that isn't going to want to do that. A woman like that. I had stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and noted that phrase with the same precision I applied to property assessments. Then I had walked back in and accepted a glass of wine and said nothing. Raymond listened to all of it. Then he said, "You already called Diana, didn't you?" I had. Diana Ferreira had been back in my life since October 4th. Our first consultation that time around covered 3 areas: the custody modification filing, what the financial disclosure could reveal, and something I had been quietly thinking about for nearly a year. The third item was this: the investment property I had purchased on Marigold Street in 2019, a rental property in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly, had been purchased through NSR Properties LLC, which meant it was corporate held and not a personal marital asset. But its rental income generated a revenue stream that fed into accounts I controlled directly. Diana wanted to know whether Derek's team had ever asked about it. They had not. She wanted to know whether I had disclosed it voluntarily. I had not been required to. She said, "That is good," and wrote something on her notepad, and I noticed she underlined it. Raymond's advice that November morning was practical. Consolidate the most liquid assets, make sure Caleb's college fund was unambiguous and untouchable, and let Diana lead. The college fund was a 529 account I had opened in Caleb's name when he was 14 months old, through a financial institution in my name as custodian. At the time of that phone call, it held $68,000. It had been growing for 8 years through automatic contributions and investment returns, quietly, the way good things sometimes grow when no one is paying attention. Derek knew it existed. I had mentioned it twice during the marriage, but he had never asked about the balance or the account number or the custodian structure. Renata certainly had not. Diana's second consultation, the Tuesday one, the week before the birthday party, had started with the financial disclosure review and ended with her handing me a printed copy of the transfer records and a printed summary of what the trust documentation on Glenda's house actually contained. I had not known all of the specifics before that meeting. Some of it surprised me. Most of it confirmed what I had suspected, but never had in writing. Glenda's house had been placed in a family trust by her late husband, Ernesto Salinas, in 2002. The trust had specific language about survivorship and inheritance that named 2 beneficiaries, Derek and Yolanda. Renata was not a beneficiary. She was not a trustee. She was not referenced in the document at all. And when Derek had, at some point in the previous year, apparently told Renata that the house would someday belong to them, meaning to Derek and Renata together, he had either misunderstood the trust terms or been creative with the truth in a way that was going to become very uncomfortable for him in public. I did not know Renata had been telling people at family gatherings that she and Derek were going to renovate the house when Glenda passed. I found that out later from Yolanda's husband, who told it to me in the parking lot after everything happened, in the tone of a man who had been wanting to say it to someone for a long time. Diana had given me the trust summary in a sealed envelope and told me to keep it in my bag and use my judgment. She said that in a calm, neutral way, the way she says most things, but she also said it while looking directly at me in a manner that suggested she had a fairly clear hypothesis about how I intended to use my judgment. I drove home from Diana's office on that Tuesday and sat in my car in my own driveway for 7 minutes before going inside. Not because I was upset, because I was mapping it. I had 4 days. I had documentation. I had a child whose 9th birthday was in 72 hours, and I had a woman who had been whittling at that child's sense of belonging for 16 months. The thing about evidence is that it only matters if you're willing to use it at the right moment. Carrying it too long makes you cautious. Using it too early gives the other side time to recover. Diana had been telling me for 6 months that the moment would make itself clear, and I had believed her in the abstract, the way you believe in weather before you feel it on your skin. Standing in Glenda's driveway holding that envelope, I felt it on my skin. Everything I had built, everything I had documented, everything Raymond and Diana had helped me organize and protect over 4 careful years. All of it was about to be tested in a living room in front of 12 members of the Salinas family and 1 confused deputy with a notepad. And Renata Voss, who had stood in a doorway and told my 9-year-old son he was not part of the family, had absolutely no idea what was inside that envelope or what was about to come through that door. The deputy's name was Officer Tomas Ruda. He was Derek's second cousin on Glenda's side, and he had clearly expected to arrive at a routine custody disagreement, 2 adults, raised voices, maybe a door that needed to be stood in front of. What he found instead was Renata Voss holding a sealed envelope she had not opened, Derek Salinas standing against a living room wall with his arms crossed in the particular way men cross their arms when they are trying to look calm and are not calm, and 12 members of the Salinas extended family arranged around the room in various stages of pretending to be interested in something other than what was happening at the front door. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He looked at Caleb, who was standing beside me with the chocolate cake carrier still in my hand and his small book tucked under his arm. "What's going on?" He kept his voice level, professional. To his credit, he did not address Renata first, which told me he had some instinct that she was not the neutral party she had presented herself as when she called him. Renata stepped forward. "This is a custody issue. Nora isn't supposed to be bringing Caleb here today. It's Derek's parenting time." I did not look at Renata when she spoke. I looked at Officer Ruda. The parenting time schedule, per the custody order dated April 17th of 2021, designates this weekend as my physical custody. Derek requested I bring Caleb for a birthday gathering, which I agreed to voluntarily. I have the order in my bag if you'd like to review it. A pause moved through the room. It was subtle, a slight shift in weight. A few people who had been looking toward the kitchen now looking directly at the door. Renata's voice went up half a register. "That's not," Derek told me. Derek uncrossed his arms. "Renata." The way he said it, flat, quiet, with his eyes on the floor, told me he had known, at some level, that this was not going to go the way she had planned. Derek is not a stupid man. He is an avoidant one. There is a difference, and the difference was showing on his face right now in the form of a man who had let something go too far and was now watching it arrive at its destination. Officer Ruda turned to Derek. "Is that right? Did you ask her to bring the boy today?" Derek's jaw worked for a moment. "Yeah, I did. So there's no custody violation." "No." Renata turned to look at Derek with an expression I had never seen on her face before. She was not a woman who expected to be contradicted in public. She blinked 3 times in quick succession, fast and tight, and then rearranged her face into something controlled. "I called you because I wasn't sure of the schedule and I wanted to make sure everything was handled correctly. That's all this was." Officer Ruda wrote something on his notepad. Then he looked at me. "Ma'am, is there anything you need to address while I'm here?" I looked at him steadily. "As a matter of fact, there is." I held out the envelope to him, not to Renata, not to Derek, to the officer. "This contains printed documentation of 3 transfers made from the joint checking account held by Derek Salinas and Renata Voss, totaling $4,200, to a separate account in Renata's name alone. The transfers occurred between September and November of this year. The account they were transferred from was subject to a financial disclosure request filed in October as part of an active custody modification proceeding. That account was disclosed. The receiving account was not." The room did not make a sound. Officer Ruda opened the envelope. He went through the first page slowly. He is a methodical person, I could tell by the way he held the paper, 2 hands, not scanning but actually reviewing. After approximately 30 seconds, he looked up at Renata. "Is this account in your name?" Renata's hand moved to her collarbone. Not to a necklace, she was not wearing one. Her fingers just rested there, briefly, like they were looking for something to hold. "That's my personal savings account. I've had it for years. There's nothing wrong with having a personal account." The transfers went from a joint account that was included in a court disclosure to a personal account that wasn't disclosed. Officer Ruda's voice had shifted, not accusatory yet, precise. "You understand that a financial disclosure in an active legal proceeding, I'm not a party to their custody case." Her voice had found its footing again. Smoother now. "Derek is. I don't have any legal obligation to disclose my personal finances to Nora." I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then I said, "The custody modification filing lists Derek's household income and assets. Renata and Derek cohabitate. She is listed as a contributing household member in the filing." Derek's attorney submitted a joint household financial statement. If funds were transferred from the disclosed joint account to an undisclosed personal account after the disclosure period began, that is a matter for the court to evaluate. I'm not asking you to arrest anyone, Officer Ruda. I am asking you to document that this information exists and was presented to you today in the presence of witnesses. I gestured, briefly, at the 12 people in the room. 12 witnesses. Renata looked at Derek. He was looking at the wall behind Officer Ruda's left shoulder with the focus of a man who has decided the safest thing to do is to be temporarily absent from his own body. Glenda, near the kitchen doorway, released the gold chain and let her hand drop to her side. She had not moved from that spot since I arrived. She was watching me now with an expression I had not seen from her in 6 years of trying, not warmth, exactly, but something adjacent to recognition. Like she was seeing something she had always suspected, and was not entirely surprised to have confirmed. Yolanda was sitting on the couch with her husband, Brent Chun, and she had stopped pretending to look at her phone approximately 4 minutes ago. She was watching her sister-in-law the way you watch someone step onto ice you're not sure will hold. Officer Ruda finished reviewing the documents. He folded them back carefully, replaced them in the envelope, and held it out to me. I'm going to recommend you take this directly to your attorney and let them determine if it warrants a formal report. What I can do today is document that you presented this material to me at this address and that the parties named were present. He looked at Renata. If there's been a material omission in an active court proceeding, that's something a judge needs to hear about. Not me. Renata's composure had been doing something complicated for the last 3 minutes, holding, visibly, by a structure that was getting thinner. She turned to me, and her voice came out with a precision that was clearly costing her something. You came to my son's birthday party to do this. It's my son's birthday party, I said. He was invited here by his father. He was then told at the door by you that he was not part of this family, in front of those people. I did not raise my voice. I kept it at the exact level and pace of someone reading a grocery list. I'd like for Caleb to have some cake and spend time with his father's family. That is all I have ever wanted from any occasion involving this house. The envelope was a contingency. You activated it. Nobody in that room spoke. Brent Chun on the couch made a sound that was not quite a cough and not quite a laugh, and Yolanda put her hand on his knee, which he ignored. Caleb looked up at me from beside my hip. Mom, can I go inside now? His voice was so small and so completely uninterested in the adult architecture around him that several people in the room had a visible physical response to it. One of Derek's aunts, a woman named Felicia who had always been kind to Caleb at holidays, put her hand over her mouth briefly. Glenda's chin moved. I looked down at him. Yes, babe, go find your dad. He went inside. He walked past Renata like she was furniture. If you are still with me, stay, because what happened in the next 22 days is the reason the envelope mattered, and why Renata's composure in that doorway was the last time she would be the one controlling the room. I called Diana Ferreira from my car before I even pulled out of Glenda's driveway. The cake was still in the back seat. I had left it inside for Caleb. She called a sheriff's deputy to the house, I told Diana, a brief silence on her end. As a custody concern? Yes. He documented my presentation of the transfer records. Diana's voice went very calm in the way it does when she is already 3 steps ahead of where the conversation is. That is actually quite helpful for us. An official document noting that the transfers were presented to law enforcement in the presence of the parties named, that's a contemporaneous record. It's going to be very difficult for Derek's attorney to argue the disclosure omission was accidental. That is what I thought. Nora, a pause, file everything. We're moving forward with the original timeline. I drove home. The late afternoon light was doing something specific to the houses on my street, turning them that particular amber color that only happens in November, and I noticed it the way you notice things when something significant has just happened, and the world has not yet adjusted its lighting to match. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment. Then I went inside and called Raymond and told him the same things I had told Diana, in the same order. Raymond said, "Good," and then asked how Caleb was doing. I told him Caleb was eating cake with his grandmother and had already forgotten the worst part of the afternoon, the way children can. Raymond said, "Good," again, and we hung up. 22 days later, Derek's attorney received a formal motion from Diana's office. The motion addressed 3 items: the undisclosed transfers, a request to review the complete joint household financial records, and a modification to the existing custody schedule pending the court's review of the financial disclosure issue. Derek's attorney, a man who primarily handled small business contracts and had taken on Derek's custody case as a favor, called Diana's office the same afternoon and asked whether there was room for informal discussion before the motion was formally filed with the court. Diana called me after that conversation. He wants to settle. On what terms? On whatever terms you consider reasonable. She did not say this with satisfaction. Diana is not a woman who performs satisfaction. She said it the way she says everything. Accurately, I thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. The custody schedule stays as written, no modification. Child support amount reflects Derek's actual household income, including the joint account activity, and I want a formal acknowledgement in the settlement agreement that the transfers were made without proper disclosure. The last item is the one his attorney will push back on. I know. He'll likely agree to the first 2 without much resistance. Then we start with those and see how committed he is to protecting her on the third one. He was not, it turned out, very committed at all. The settlement agreement was signed on a Wednesday afternoon in December at Diana's office. Derek came alone. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, not disheveled exactly, but reduced, like something had been taken out of him and not replaced. He did not look at me directly when we were in the same room waiting for Diana's assistant to finish organizing the documents. I did not require him to. We have a child together. We are going to be in rooms together for the next 9 years at minimum. The goal was never to humiliate Derek. The goal had never been about Derek at all. He signed. I signed. Diana's assistant witnessed. The formal acknowledgement of the undisclosed transfers was in there, in clear language, at Derek's attorney's request, worded as neutrally as possible, but present. On the record, attached to a court proceeding. A document that existed and said what it said and could not be unsaid. Renata was not at the signing. She had not been at many places, I was told, since the afternoon at Glenda's house. Yolanda's husband Brent, who turned out to be a quietly observant person with a long memory for things Yolanda had dismissed over the years, reached out to me about 2 weeks after the birthday party. He said he thought I should know that Renata had told Derek's family, on multiple occasions over the preceding year, that the Riverside house would belong to her and Derek. That she had plans for it. That she had described the trust structure to people as a technicality that would be worked out. Brent had never believed it was a technicality. He had not said so because Yolanda preferred to keep family tensions below the surface, and he had respected that preference until the afternoon he watched a woman tell a 9-year-old boy he was not family. He said, "I should have said something sooner." He sounded like he meant it. I told him the important thing was what he was saying now. Renata and Derek separated in late January. I did not hear this from Derek. I heard it from Caleb, who came home from a weekend visit and said, "Dad's girlfriend doesn't come over anymore," in the same tone he uses to report that his school changed the lunch menu. Children that age process change through information, not narrative. It is one of the things I find clarifying about them. The settlement agreement was enforceable. The custody schedule was unchanged. The financial disclosure issue was referred to the court's records and noted in the case file, which meant it existed for any future proceeding that might need it. Diana told me the probability of Derek seeking another modification in the near term was, in her professional assessment, very low. I am telling you that not to celebrate. I am telling you because I spent 4 years building something quietly, in the margins of a family that had decided what I was and was not willing to revise that assessment, and I needed to know that it had been worth the patience. That the inventory I had been taking in those rooms, at those dinners, at those tables, had amounted to something. It had amounted to this: a signed document, an unchanged schedule, a 9-year-old boy who came home and immediately asked if we could go to the park and then complained about the park being too cold and wanted to go home and play his video game instead, which we did. We sat on the couch together and he played his game and I watched him play it and did not once think about an envelope or a deputy or a doorway. Glenda called me in February. I did not expect it. She asked how Caleb was. I told her he was fine, that he had just learned to ride his bike without looking at his hands, which he was very proud of. She said that Derek had been the same way about his bike. There was a pause, and then she said, "I should have said something at the door." Just that, no elaboration. I told her I understood. I think I meant it. Renata, as of the last information I have, is renting an apartment in Fontana and working at an insurance company in their claims department. I know this because Brent mentioned it once, and I noted it the same way I note most things, as information that does not require a response from me. She is not in my son's life. She is not in Derek's house. She is, as far as I am concerned, a person who made a significant miscalculation and is now living inside the consequences of it, which is where people tend to end up eventually. NSR Properties has 5 rental units now. Raymond and I meet quarterly. Caleb's college fund crossed $74,000 in the spring, which I mention not because the number is the point, but because it exists, and it grows, and it belongs to him in a way that nobody can transfer out of a joint account or fail to disclose to a court. Diana sends me a card every December. It says the same thing every year: have a good one. I appreciate the consistency. The people in that room at Glenda's house have never looked at me the same way since November. Some of them, Felicia, Brent, a couple of Derek's cousins I had always liked, look at me like something has been clarified. Glenda looks at me like a woman who spent 22 years misreading a situation and is not yet sure how to account for the time. Derek looks at me the way people look at something they've learned to be careful around, not with hostility, just with the specific attention of a person who now understands that the ground has more layers than they thought. I was not wrong to stand there. I was not wrong to hand over the envelope. And I was not wrong to drive home afterward and call my financial advisor and my attorney before I called anyone else, because those were the people who had helped me build the thing that made standing there possible. My mother asked me once whether it bothered me that the Salinas family had spent so many years not seeing me clearly. I thought about it honestly. What bothered me was never that they underestimated me. What bothered me was the afternoon Caleb's chin went. That was the moment the inventory ended and the action began. Everything after that was just execution. So tell me, was using that envelope at a 9-year-old's birthday party the right call, or should I have waited for the courtroom? I genuinely want to know what you think.